Hi class. Today we are going to go over Unit 5. This is Medication Administration, and it's going to be covering all of the material from Chapter 35 in your text. So here are our learning objectives for today. As always, I'll let you take a look over them and just verify what we will be learning in class today. Okay. So we're going to start talking about medication administration by first reviewing the medication order. So the medication order will be our order that's given by the provider. And this order is specific to our patient, and it denotes or it tells us these specific things. So it's going to tell us the drug that's to be given, the dosage or the amount, the form of the drug, the time for or frequency of the administration, and the route by which the drug is to be given. So that sounds like a lot, but that is what is part of every medication order that the provider will be giving you as the medical assistant. So you can see our example down here. You may not be able to tell from this handwriting very well, but so our drug here is called metoprolol. It's actually a blood pressure medicine, also a heart rate medicine as well. So it's kind of used for two different things, but metoprolol is a very common drug. And our dosage is going to be 50 milligrams. So we have our dosage there. The form is going to be in capsule or tablet, etc. Here it doesn't necessarily say that. That is one thing that's kind of missing from this specific order. Time, here it says BID, which we'll go over abbreviations later in just a few minutes. But abbreviations for BID would mean 2 times per day. And then our route, that's going to be PO, so that means by mouth. So far, we know that this drug, he wants metoprolol to be given 50 milligrams by mouth 2 times a day. So we have our drug, our dosage. We're kind of missing that form. We're not sure if it's going to be a capsule, a tablet, it probably is going to be whatever the pharmacist has on hand in that dosage amount. And then we have our time and our route. Oh, just one quick thing. Also in this prescription here underneath, you can see it says hold for heart rate less than 55 or a systolic blood pressure less than 100 milligrams per mercury. So we know there's some considerations that the patient may need to take before taking this medication. I'm just letting you know what that says underneath it in case you were wondering. Okay, so that was our medication order. So now we're going to switch gears and talk about the actual prescription. A medication order may be just used inside of the clinic for you to know what to be giving the patient when you're there with the patient. The prescription is what is going to be leaving the clinic with the patient to get a medication filled. So a prescription is a written legal document that gives directions for compounding, dispensing, and administering a medication to a patient. And there's actually 8 parts to a prescription. So hang with me. We're going to get through all of these, and then we're going to look at a few examples of them. So our first part is going to be usually near the top. It's going to include the physician's information. It's going to have their name, their address, their telephone number, and if it's a controlled substance, they may also have to include their DEA registration number. Number 2. This is going to include the patient's name, the patient's date of birth, the patient's address, and also the date the prescription was written. Having the date is important because after a certain amount of time, you are unable to get a prescription filled in some cases. So the third section is our superscription. This includes the symbol of that RX. So on most prescription pages, you'll see a big RX written in some form or fashion, and this is actually called the superscription. And that superscription is going to tell us our recipe. Then we have the inscription. This is the inscription. This is section 4. The inscription states the names and the quantities of the ingredients to be included in the medication. So this is where it lays out that recipe, what exactly is going into that medication that's to be filled. So again, that's the names and quantities of the ingredients. Number 5. So we went from superscription to inscription, and now we're at the subscription. So number 5 is the subscription, and this gives directions to the pharmacist for filling the prescription. So it's going to tell them, exactly how they want the recipe to be done. And that's for the pharmacist to use. Moving on to number 6. This is the signature, or SIG, and this is going to be the most important part for our patient. This is where it gives the directions for the patient. So how many times a day they're supposed to use it, how many drops, how much, that kind of thing. And then number 7, the physician's going to have to sign. There's always some sort of signature from the physician that is prescribing. And usually if there's an area for the physician to sign, there may be a box or some other indication that will allow for generic substitution, or if generics are not allowed. In some cases, generic medications are not allowed due to certain things. So just know that sometimes doctors allow substitutions for a generic brand, sometimes they do not. And then our last part of our prescription, number 8, this is going to tell us if a refill is allowed for this prescription. So a refill, usually there's a number and they just simply circle it, or if this medication is PRN on an as needed basis. This is where the physician indicates whether or not it can be refilled or not. So we're going to look at some examples of each of these. So here, this is a really good example because on each little section it tells us what they're talking about. So we can see here at the top, like we were talking about, the prescriber's information, that DEA number is at the top. So all of that about the prescriber. Then we move on down, we see our patient, Laurel Hardy, age 41, where their address. And then we also have the date that that prescription was written. We see our big superscription here, that RX. Then we see our inscription, or that medication that's prescribed. Phenobarbital, simethicone, and magnesium carbonate. Those are the 3 things going into this drug. Then we have our subscription, which is our instructions to the pharmacist. We don't necessarily have to know what that means, but we need to know that that is the instruction to the pharmacist so they know what to do. And then there's our instructions to the patient. I can't really tell here exactly what it says. I can see capsules, something. But in this case, just I want you to know that the signature, that SIG section, is the directions for the patient. We see that refill section where the physician can tell us if there's going to be a refill. And then there's signature, that MD signature down there at the bottom. So I think that's a really good example of what a prescription looks like. So here's a few other examples for you to just look over quickly. You can kind of see they may have different boxes in different areas, but they all include the same types of information. So let's talk about e-prescribing. E-prescribing is much more common these days. It's the process of electronically accessing the patient's medical history, prescribing a medication, and selecting a pharmacy. So medication prescriptions handled electronically have reduced the amount of medication errors, which is awesome. Some states actually even require physicians to fill their prescriptions through e-scribing. And if they don't, they even get kind of a penalty from Medicare for not e-prescribing. Patients really enjoy e-prescriptions because it has more convenience for them. And however, there is some question to the security and confidentiality of e-prescriptions. Not quite sure about the safety of the software sometimes used to send these prescriptions back and forth, and the confidentiality of the patient information getting from the provider to the pharmacist. So that is sometimes questioned when talking about e-prescribing. I do want you to note that controlled substances, so those are our like painkillers, our Lortabs, Percocets, morphine, that kind of thing. These are Schedule II drugs, and they are not allowed to be e-prescribed. They are not allowed to be e-prescribed. The physician must do a written prescription, and they're also not allowed to indicate any refills for these. So it's a one-time prescription. If the patient needs another prescription for this controlled substance, they will then have to come get a new prescription when they run out. Okay, so moving on, if you are in my intro class, you know we have talked about a few of these abbreviations, but here are a list of very common abbreviations for medication administration. I'm quickly going to read through some of these, kind of highlight the more important ones for this. So AC, before meals. This is often used when indicating the use of insulin. Ad lib, or as desired. AQ, water. BID, twice a day. This is also a very common one you may see. The next one is the letter C. Usually you'll see this with a dash over the top of the C letter. And this stands for with. CAP for capsule. DIL or DIL for dilute. ELIX for elixir. G or GM for gram. GR for grain. GT for drop. H for hour. IM for intramuscular. IV for intravenous. kg for kilogram. A big L for liter. LIQ for liquid. Milligram is mg. ml, milliliter. milliliter. NPO, nothing by mouth. P, after. PC, after meals. Per, or by or with is the meaning for that. PO, by mouth. This one's very common. PRN, as needed. PT, that's our patient. Q means every. QH means every hour. So here we add the numbers in between. That's going to be every 2, 3, 4 hours. Q2, 3, 4, H. QID stands for 4 times a day. QS is of sufficient quantity. RX, this is kind of our prescription or what we need to take. S, usually this is going to have a dash over top of it. That's going to stand for without. SOL, or our solution. SS stands for 1/2. Stat means right now, immediately, at once. Tab stands for tablet. A big T, BS, tablespoon. TSP is teaspoon. TID, 3 times a day. TR, tincture. And UNG stands for ointment. So some of these are pretty common. You might have heard them just in everyday usage. And some of these are more common in just the pharmaceutical type world. So again, if you're in my intro class, we've kind of mentioned some of these, but we're going to go over it here as well because it's very important for prescription writing too. But there's a list of abbreviations that should not be used, and the reason being is that they're often mistaken for different things. So here we have a list of things that are no longer approved by JCO. It's a company that kind of looks over healthcare type items. And here they have decided that these abbreviations should not be allowed anymore. So U, it was often mistaken for a 0, a 4, or a CC, and instead you would write unit. IU stands for International Unit. It was often mistaken for IV or the number 10. We now just write that out as international units. Here, you may see this still in the clinic. A lot of physicians have not broken this habit yet, but QD, 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 all the different variations, QOD, all of the other variations of that, which stand for daily or every other day. They were mistaken for different things, and so we now write daily or write every other day. We also need to break the habit of using a trailing 0. So here in our example, that X would be like a number 3, 3.0 milligrams. Instead, you would just simply write the number 3 milligrams if it is in fact an even number with no decimal place behind it. And then lack of a leading 0. So if you do have a decimal point before the number, after, if you have a decimal point and you have a number after that decimal point, you need to have a 0 in front of it. So our example here would be, you would need to write 0.3 instead of just having 0.3 milligrams, because the decimal point often becomes missed when you don't have that leading 0. The last one here, MS or MSO4 and MgSO4. One means morphine sulfate, the other means magnesium sulfate. They were being confused for one another, so we simply write out each one. Okay, I'm going to wrap up this first video. If you will, follow me along to the second video and we'll continue on through this chapter.